Good morning, everyone. I noticed the chat is disabled, and normally we're saying hello to people in chat. Um, we're really privileged to have Colin Walker with us today. He's given numerous programs to the CSSA and always fantastic, usually with an aloe tint. We like that because I love aloes. He's also co-author of probably one of the premier aloe books ever produced. Um, Anyway, I won't give much further ado, but I know you're going to enjoy our really talented and really incredible speaker, Colin Walker. I present to you.
Right, shall I share the screen?
You should be able to.
Where we see your screen. And now you just have to start your slideshow.
How's that? Is that looking good?
It's looking good, and I'm going to mute and stop my video.
It's all
And
yours. We'll let you know if we have any issues.
Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you, Kelly, for that introduction. So today's presentation is somewhat specialized because I'm actually only going to talk about 6 species. So there we go. So the tree aloes aloidendron is my talk. So let's get going. There are 3 sections to this talk. The first one is history. So back to the dawn when the first tree aloes were discovered, right up until today with the modern current taxonomy. Then I'll look at the individual species of tree aloe. And finally, there's a shortish section on tree aloes in art. So let's get going. So we're in South Africa in 1685. So the Cape Colony had been established by the Dutch in 1652. So the Dutch were the leading guys in terms of exploring Southern Africa, well, all sorts of parts of the world, mainly via the Dutch East India Company. Simon van der Stel was the commander at the Cape Colony. Simon van der Stel was quite interested in the natural history of the country he was responsible for, the plants, the animals, the landscapes and the natives and so on. He wanted to organize an expedition north from the Cape Colony to find a copper mine. So in 1685, he set off with a very large entourage to head north from Cape Town. And late in 1685, they did indeed reach the copper mine, which is close to the current day town of Springbok. He took with him an artist, Hendrik Claudius, to record plants, animals, and the scenery that they encountered on their journey. And this is one of the images that Claudius produced. This is actually the copper mine near current day Springbok. So at the top, you can see HVR, that is actually the copper mine. Along the bottom are actually tree aloes. And left here is one of the images produced by Claudius. He actually drew 4 aloes, but his images were not published during his lifetime, nor was the very detailed diary that Simon van der Stel produced. There's a total mystery here because the images, the drawings, and Simon van der Stel's diary was discovered in the library at Trinity College, Dublin in 1922. So where this diary had been from 1686 to 1922, we have no idea. And Waterhouse published the diary and most of Claudius's drawings in 1932. And the image there on the left is, well, a tree aloe, let's call it Alodichotoma for the most part. So these images were not published during their lifetime. There was plagiarism going on even in those days, and these images were actually published by other people. So copies were published. And on the right, here we have Leonard Plukenet in London in 1692, published a book called Phytographia, which included copies of Claudius's 4 aloes, and bottom right is a tree aloe. And if you compare that with the image on the left, which is Claudius's original, you can see where he got the information, where Plukenet got the information from. So that is a plagiarized copy. Of course, it was not acknowledged at all. Francis Masson now in 1776 in South Africa. Francis Masson was the first official collector sent to South Africa by Kew. So we're in the reign of King George III. Joseph Banks was the unofficial director at Kew. This was a private royal botanic garden at this time. It only became a national botanic garden in 1841. So this was a royal garden at this point. Francis Masson did a lot of exploring in South Africa. He's famous for his book on Stapeliads, Stapelia Nova, published in 1796, 1797. He was a talented artist. That book includes 41 hand-colored paintings produced by Masson. But he also discovered and named the first tree aloe. So here's his description. We found a new species of aloe here called by the Dutch cockaboom, of which the Hottentots make quivers to hold their arrows. These trees were about 12 feet high with a straight, smooth trunk, about 10 inches or a foot in diameter and 5 or 6 feet in length, which were divided into 2 branches, and those were again subdivided into 2 branches, which terminated in a bunch of thick, succulent leaves surrounded by the stem, spear-shaped and tied without spines and hanging down like the leaves of a Dracæna Draco, that's the dragon tree. We did not see it in flower, but by the above characters took it to be a new species and called it Alodichotoma. So Francis Masson in 1776 described the first tree aloe as Alodichotoma. Although he was a talented artist, he never actually drew his new aloe, regrettably. However, he was followed by William Patterson. William Patterson was an explorer, not a botanist, not a natural historian. He was employed by the Countess of Strathmore, who was his patron, if you like, to go to South Africa and bring back wonderful, exciting plants for her collection here in Scotland. In 1789, William Patterson published a book, a narrative of 4 journeys. It has 19 hand-colored plates, of which 10 are succulents, of which 4 illustrate Alodichotoma. So these, if you like, the first authentic scientific published images of Alodichotoma. There it is in flowers, so that we have a rosette on the left and details of the inflorescence on the right. But William Patterson hardly described the plant. I mean, his book is just a travelogue, basically. But the images in this book are pretty impressive. So these are the first detailed paintings of Alodichotoma. Another explorer was Thomas Baines, again an explorer, quite a talented artist, but not a botanist. So Thomas Baines joined the James Chapman expedition to Southwest Africa, which is now Namibia, and he found the great tree aloe of Damaraland in flower in 1861 near modern-day Walvis Bay. And he wrote, kneeling down so as to bring my arms low, enough to embrace the solid trunk, I found the circumference to be nearly 12 feet. The effect of the magnificent crown of leaves and flowers was lovely in the extreme. So kind of flowery writing, but he was a very talented artist. Here we are near Walvis Bay in 1861, and Thomas Baynes painted the great tree aloe of Damaraland. There are several versions of this painting. This is one of them. And here's another. Somewhat artistic license here is added a flock of ostriches. And in 1866, he published an article in a journal called Nature and Art. This was actually the very first volume of this journal. So 1866, his article was entitled The Great Tree Aloe of Damaraland. And here is coloured painting by Thomas Baynes. And we've only got one ostrich here and not the flock. So as I say, there's a bit of artistic license. But this is the first published image of aloe dichotoma in habitat, the whole tree in habitat. He also painted a branch and the inflorescence. This was not published in his article. This is in the Natural History Museum in London, this painting. As I say, he was an explorer, an artist, not a botanist. He went on other expeditions. In 1873, he's now in what is now KwaZulu-Natal, Matabeleland, or Zululand, if you like. And he discovered a second tree aloe. We're calling it Aloe Bainesii here at the moment. And here's his painting of Aloe Bainesii. And here is the published image in Gardener's Chronicle. William Thistleton Dyer was then director at Kew, and he published an article in Gardener's Chronicle, which is a very famous magazine, in 1874 on the tree aloes of South Africa. So he dealt with Masson's Aloe dichotoma, and he also published two new species of tree aloe. This is the first of the new ones, Aloe Bainesii, naming it after Thomas Baynes, who had discovered it and sent his drawing, his painting, back to Kew. And this is the lithograph that was produced from his coloured painting. At the same time, Mrs. Mary Barber was also in Zululand. She discovered a tree aloe. She sent living material to Kew. And here is on the right a drawing of her material at Kew. So Thistleton Dyer had painting from Thomas Baynes and living material from Mary Barber, and he thought they were two different species. So in 1874, he described two new aloes from Zululand, which is now KwaZulu-Natal. One, Aloe Bainesii, named after Thomas Baynes, and one, Aloe Barberi, named after Mrs. Barber. This is the article in 1874. 6 months later, in the same year, he published a very short note in the same magazine, Gardener's Chronicle, by which time he'd rethought the situation and decided that these were actually the same species. And because they were published at the same time, he could decide which was the correct. So they were both validly published, but he'd now decided there was only one species. And he decided that his new species ought to be called Aloe Barberi. Now, why he chose Aloe Barberi and not Aloe Bainesii, he doesn't tell us. But anyway, he described both species. He decided that he wanted to call it Aloe Barberi, so that became the correct name. But for 120 years, this was overlooked. It was only in 1994 when Gideon Smith and his colleagues uncovered this note by William Thistleton Dyer, indicating that he wanted to call it Aloe barbarae. So Aloe barbarae is the correct name if you're going to call it an aloe. Bizarrely, though, here we are at Kew in 1885. So Curtis's Botanical Magazine is the longest running botanical magazine in the world, started by William Curtis in 1787. It's still running today, still with the same format, coloured paintings, drawings, whatever, of plants, with descriptions and guidance on cultivation and so on. John Baker was the aloe expert at Kew. He published the aloe in Ahorthias and whatever else in the flora of South Africa and also the flora of tropical Africa. So he was technically the aloe expert at Kew, but he ignored his boss's decision to take Aloe barbarae to be the correct name. Here we are in 1885, and he's calling it Aloe bainesii. So this confusion lasted for 120 years, as I say, until 1994, when Gideon Smith sorted it out. And if you want to call it an aloe, you should call this Aloe barbarae and not Aloe bainesii. We're in Germany now. 1908, Alwin Berger, he published the first modern monograph of aloe, along with Herwerthia, Gasteria, and other close relatives. And this is Alwin Berger's image of what was then known as Aloe dichotoma. Unlike Curtis's Botanical Magazine and the other images I've shown you, all the images in Berger's monograph are half-tone. But this is the starting point for the modern taxonomy of aloe and all its relatives. We're now looking at another tree aloe. Here we have an image published in 1935. So Neville Pilans was quite a famous South African botanist. He discovered another tree aloe in 1926 at Cornell's Kop in the Richtersveld. And in 1928, Louise Guthrie named this Aloe pilansii in honor of Neville Pilans. She just published a very short Latin description, no image. In February 1935, though, Neville Pilans published an article in the South African Gardening and Country Life, in which he published a photograph, the first published photograph of Aloe pilansii. I'm sorry, this is rather grainy. I've done what I could do to kind of improve this image, but there you go. This is the first grainy published image of a very significant tree aloe, Aloe pilansii. Still in South Africa, a publication called Flowering Plants of Africa, very similar in format to Curtis's Botanical Magazine. This was established in 1921. Similar format, coloured plates with accompanying text, but this focuses just on African plants. It was first called Flowering Plants of South Africa, then it changed its name to Flowering Plants of Africa. It does deal with Madagascan plants as well. And this is a source of a lot of information. This journal has focused a lot on aloes over the years, so it is still in print, and I think about 200 coloured plates of aloes have been published now. As I say, not just African aloes, but Madagascan ones as well. Here we are in 1938. On the left is the published coloured plate of Aloe dichotoma by a very talented South African artist, Scythe Naleti. She had published about 700 plates over a 50-year period. And here on the right is a little cartoon of her at work. I've actually got that cartoon in my collection here, which I was rather thrilled about. I bought a copy of her book at the Flora of the Transvaal, and in it there were a few postcards, and one of them was this image of her. We're now in Somalia. So Gilbert Reynolds and Peter Bally were on an expedition to Somalia. So Gilbert Reynolds is the doyen of Aloe students. He has travelled about 100,000 miles in search of aloes throughout Africa and Madagascar. He never went to Arabia. He went on quite a few expeditions by himself, but sometimes he had colleagues. And his trip to Somalia was accompanied by Peter Bally. They discovered the Somali tree aloe. So this is the first published image of aloe. Well, Reynolds called it Aloe eminens. So he published that tree aloe in the Journal of South African Botany in 1958 with this black and white photograph. Reynolds is famous for two books on aloes. So in 1950, he published The Aloes of South Africa, which included information on the South African species. So that was particularly Aloe dichotoma. But here, in 1966, he published The Aloes of Tropical Africa and Madagascar. And in this book, he dealt with, well, he called it Aloe bainsii, and also his new species, Aloe eminens. So together, Reynolds' two books were really the foundation of modern aloe taxonomy. He discovered and described around 80 new species of aloe, most of which are recognized today. And in total, he recognized 335 species of aloe. The total has now gone up to about 550 since then. So there have been a lot of modern books on aloes since Reynolds' time. I'm just showing you a couple of the covers of two books on South African aloes by my friend and colleague Gideon Smith, only because both of these feature Aloe dichotoma on the front cover. I have to show you the cover of my book. So Kelly very kindly mentioned this. So I was one of the four authors of this book, published in 2011. It was published by Kew and the British Cactus and Succulent Society, and it was Kew who decided to call this a definitive guide. The four of us as authors had no choice in the matter. I would never, out of choice, called anything a definitive guide, because no sooner was it published than it was out of date, of course. Anyway, this book happens to have Aloe dichotoma on the front cover. Right, all change, guys. 2 years after our book was published, a molecular study by Daru and his colleagues was published in Taxon. And this has changed the whole scene in terms of aloe taxonomy and the relatives of aloes. So their molecular study showed that aloe was not a unified concept. And indeed, neither was Haworthia. So there were two ways to resolve this conflict. Everything could have been put back into aloe. So back in 1753, Carl Linnaeus described the genus Aloe with 22 species, and Linnaeus included in his genus Aloe Haworthia, Gasteria, and Astroloba. Now, we could have gone back to that Linnaean concept of aloe. So aloe would then have consisted of, well, I guess around about 750 species. Would you all like your Haworthias to be renamed as aloes? I think not. So the route that was taken was to split aloe and Haworthia up. And in 2013, using the molecular data from Daru, Ronno, Clopper, and Gideon Smith split aloe into a small number of separate genera, one of which is Aloidendron. You can see Aloidendron at the bottom there. Aloidendron in this molecular family tree turns out to be the most primitive. Aloe was also split into Arista aloe, Goni aloe, and Tulista. Sorry, not Tulista, Kumara. Whereas Haworthia was split into Haworthiopsis and Tulista. So that is the current state of the taxonomy. Fortunately for aloe, most species stayed in aloe. So the numbers on the right are the number of species as recognized by Darrow in 2013. Those numbers are somewhat out of date now, although the number at the bottom for Aloidendron is actually right. There are 6 species of Aloidendron. Notice also in this molecular family tree the genus Kumara. Now, this is a very old name. This dates back to 1786. This genus consists of 2 species, one of which, well, both of which used to be an aloe. So Aloe plicotilis and Aloe himanthifolia are now Kumara plicotilis and Kumara himanthifolia. Yes, that's right. Okay. So that is where we were at in 2013. Here is a part of that molecular family tree that just deals with the tree aloes. At this point, they had not included Aloe tongense. They didn't have, presumably they didn't have material of it. So this branch of the molecular family tree just deals with 5 of the 6 tree aloes. So the Southern African or the Western Southern African species, Aloe palanzia, Aloe dichotoma, at this point, Ramosissima was a subspecies of dichotoma. So those 3 with yellow flowers formed one branch. Aloe eminens, which we've seen is a Somali endemic, and Aloe barbarae form another branch. They have reddish or orange flowers. So the yellow flowered species are more closely related than are the 2 red flowers. If Aloe tongense had been included, we would have expected it to be in that lower branch as well. Just to hit you with some molecular biology, I will be asking questions later. We've now jumped to 2019, and Malakazi and colleagues in the Frontiers of Plant Science published another molecular study. This is a gene map of the chloroplast genome of Aloe palanzii. I won't hit you with too much molecular biology here, but within a plant cell, there are 3 components which contain DNA. So there's the chromosomes, which is where most of the DNA resides, and these are where most of the genes are. The chloroplast is the cell organelle that carries out photosynthesis, and that has DNA in it. There's also another organelle called the mitochondria, which also has DNA in it. Anyway, we'll forget about that. The chloroplast has a smallish genome, which is now called the plastome. And with modern molecular sequencing, it is fairly easy to sequence the genes of this. It is much, much smaller than the nuclear DNA, which is in the chromosomes. So here we have a gene map of the chloroplast genome or the plastome of Aloidendron palanzii. This is quite a small DNA molecule, and it is relatively easy to sequence compared to the chromosome DNA, which is huge by comparison, and we're a long way off from having that completely sequenced. Enough of the molecular biology. What were the results? This is now the current molecular family tree of the tree aloes. So at the top, we've got Aloidendron ramosissimum dichotomum and Palanzii, they are closely related. At the bottom, we have Aloidendron eminence. This is the Somali endemic. We've got Aloidendron barbarae, but look, hey, we've also got something called Aloestrella susani. This used to be Aloe susani. This is a Madagascan endemic. And this is the first evidence we have that Aloestrella is actually a tree aloe as well. The relationships between all of these are still slightly controversial, hence the dotted line, but the evidence from Malakazi et al. In 2019 is that Aloestrella is actually a tree aloe, but that is still work in progress. The name change has yet to be published. For the current talk, I'm not going to consider Aloestrella susani because currently it is not formally a tree aloe, but the molecular evidence does indicate that it is actually one of them. Okay, so in 2013, Ronald Cropper and Gideon Smith published the new genus Aloidendron. This is actually a name that dates back to Alwyn Berger in 1908. So this was aloe section Aloidendron, and Ronell and Gideon in 2013, what they did was they elevated section Aloidendron to become genus Aloidendron, and Aloidendron just means tree aloes, hence the name of this talk. So these are the key features of tree aloes. So it is a very natural group of 6 species, soon to become 7. They all have woody stems, so these are trees up to 18 meters tall. Although one of them, Ramosissima, isn't actually a tree, it's more a shrub. It doesn't have a single trunk. They mainly have fissured bark, so young branches actually are smooth, whereas the mature plants have a rough fissured bark. There's usually a single trunk, although, as I say, one species, Aloidendron ramosissimum, is actually more shrub-like. A key feature is dichotomous branching. So when a branch divides, it splits into 2. Back in 1776, Francis Masson observed that with what he called allodichotoma. Rarely, though, they are trichotomously branched. Leaves are narrowly lanceolate, so that's kind of long and thin in terminal rosettes. And a key feature is that the dead leaves are not persistent. So those of you who grow quite a lot of aloes will know that on quite a lot of species, the dead leaves remain, particularly the larger growing species like Aloe ferox and Aloe marlothiae. They have lots of dead leaves which remain attached to the trunk. And the inflorescence is a branched panicle, and you see pictures of those. So those are the key features of Aloidendron. In 2015, Ernst van Jaarsveld and Eric Judd published a book on tree aloes of Africa. I don't want to say too much about this book because, regrettably, it is absolutely full of mistakes. My copy is covered in pencil marks. They dealt with 7 species. So the 6 tree aloes that I'm going to talk about, but they also included Kumara plicotilis, which is not actually a tree aloe. It belongs to a completely different genus. I will move on swiftly. 2019, Flowering Plants of Africa, the journal I introduced earlier, had a major paper on Aloidendron barbarae. I was the lead author, and here's the cover image of that volume of Flowering Plants of Africa, featuring the inflorescence of Aloidendron barbarae, painted by another very talented South African artist, Gillian Condy, on the right, who I actually met at a conference about 10 years before. So Gillian painted Aloidendron barbarae specifically to accompany and illustrate our paper. All right, so here we are then. We have currently 6 species of Aloidendron, and I'm going to look at each one of those in turn. So the very first one that was discovered on the Simon van der Stel expedition, named by Francis Masson in 1776 as Aloe dichotoma. Now we're calling Aloidendron dichotomum. And here is its distribution map. So it's quite widespread in the western part of South Africa and I guess the southern part of Namibia. And here it is. This is taken by my colleague Peter Skelton, Aloidendron dichotomum in the Fish River Canyon in southern Namibia. And this gives you the typical view of a tree aloe. So a single straight trunk with a rough fissured bark. Some of those edges of the bark are really quite rough and sharp, with a canopy of leaves, rosettes at the terminus of each branch, dichotomous branching, and the absence of persistent leaves. This is photographed at the Karoo Botanic Gardens, and on the left, that beautifully illustrates a key feature of all tree aloes. All of them have dichotomous branching, as you can see that V shape. Dichotomous branching isn't unique to tree aloes. Some other aloes have this as well, notably a few cliff-dwelling Ethiopian aloes, and it is also a feature of the genus Kumara plicatilis, and Kumara humantifolia. So it's not truly diagnostic of tree aloes, but all tree aloes branch dichotomously. Again, in cultivation at the Karoo Botanic Gardens, you can tell this is the Karoo Botanic. This is Botanic Gardens and not in the wild. That is Aloe pearsoni in the front there. The two species don't actually grow together, but it can form a formidable trunk in cultivation, as you can see. This is my specimen in cultivation in a pot. That plant is what, 50 centimeters tall, I suppose. These do not make good potted plants. These are big trees. You don't really want to be growing these in a pot, to be honest. But this shows you what a young Aloidendron dichotomum can look like. So as a young plant, the surface of the stem is actually smooth. And just the base of that is starting to get a bit woody and fissured. This is a top view of the rosette. So it has small teeth on the leaf margins. This is the late Roy Mottram's plant of Aloidendron dichotomum. This is interesting because there are tubercles on the leaves here. Generally, Aloe dichotoma does not have tubercles, so I can't tell you any more about that. And here is Aloe dichotomum drawn by Eric Judd. We will hear more about Eric right at the end. Eric is a very famous aloe artist. He first started painting aloes in 1967, and he was specifically commissioned to paint the tree aloes again for the tree aloe book. So Ernst's book on tree aloes that I showed you the cover of was co-authored by Eric. So Eric did the paintings for the book, and here is his painting of Aloidendron dichotomum. Okay, Aloidendron ramosissimum distribution. So this compared to Aloidendron dichotomum has a much more restricted distribution in the same two countries. So northwestern South Africa in the Richtersveld and southwestern Namibia. This is it in habitat in southern Namibia, photographed by my friend and colleague Alice van den Bon. And this shows you why this species was called Ramocissimum. So Ramocissimum means well branched, and it is indeed. So this is not a tree, guys. This is not a tree aloe. This is a shrubby aloidendron, if you like. It branches densely from the base. Here it is with Alice in habitat again, same location taken by her late husband, Alan, at Whitputs in southern Namibia. There is on the left detail of it. So it is a very densely branched shrubby species. At this locality, Whitputs, it was in fruit. And it was regenerating. So Alice and her colleagues actually found quite a few sedums. So this species is threatened, but not as badly threatened as the next one I'm going to talk about. But it is recruiting new seedlings, which is good to know. Both these images were taken at the Karoo Botanic Gardens to show you the contrast between these two species. So in the background is Aloidendron dichotomum. In the foreground is Aloidendron ramocissimum, a densely branched shrub. One study I have not mentioned so far was in terms of the total DNA content of aloes. And that study, crude though it was, indicated that, what was then Aloe dichotoma and Aloe ramosissima were very closely related. And so ramosissima became a subspecies of Aloe dichotoma. That reclassification is no longer accepted. Particularly on the basis of molecular studies, gene sequencing, and so on, which gives us a much clearer picture of relationships. On the right is a close-up of Aloidendron ramocissimum, just showing you how densely the branching is in that species. Even closer detail there. And again, a painting from the Tree Aloe book by Eric Judd, from Plants Helskloof in the Richtersveld. So again, like dichotomum, we have yellow flowers. All right, Aloidendron pilanzii. This has got an even narrower distribution than the two we've already discussed. So it occurs in the Richtersveld in South Africa and southern Namibia. This was Graham Williamson's, this is taken from Graham Williamson's paper in 1998, and I'll show you the cover of the journal Bradley in a minute. So this is the late Graham Williamson's distribution map of Aloidendron pilanzii. Graham was mainly looking at populations in the Richtersveld, which are all identified there by letters. C is significant. This is Cornell's Cop. This is the type locality. This is where Neville Pilans discovered his namesake, and that was named after him. Since 1998, there have been further studies of the populations in Namibia. So actually, Aloidendron pilanzii has a broader distribution in Namibia than is indicated on Graham Williamson's map. So quite a few population studies have taken place since Graham's landmark publication in 1998. So here we are again with Alice van den Bon at Cornell's Cop, the type locality for Aloidendron pilanzii. And you can see a few specimens there. So compared to Aloidendron dichotomum, Aloe pilanzii is branched, but not anywhere near as densely branched as Aloidendron dichotomum, and absolutely nowhere near as densely branched as Aloidendron ramocissimum. Closer views now. You can start to see the dichotomous branching here. So if you look at the image on the left, and the two branches to the right, that beautifully illustrates the dichotomous branching, which is such a characteristic feature of this genus. Right, back to 1998. You must all, I'm sure, be aware of Sir David Attenborough and all his wonderful natural history films. In 1993, the BBC broadcast a series, The Private Life of Plants. And David Attenborough visited Cornell's COP along with Graham Williamson. And this is the cover of volume 16 of Bradleya, the yearbook of the British Captain Society, which is equivalent to Hasseltonia, the CSSA yearbook. So in 1998, Graham published a paper on the distribution and conservation status of aloe. Well, it was Aloe Perlanzii then, it's now Aloidendron Perlanzii. And even at that point in 1998, there was concern about the conservation status of this species. Quite a lot of studies have since been undertaken. The current status as of this year, 2024, Aloidendron Perlanzii, using the CITES criteria, the International Union of Conservation of Nature criteria, Aloidendron Perlanzii is critically endangered. The most recent population studies from 2022 indicate that there are somewhere in the region of between 5,000 and 9,000 trees of Aloidendron Perlanzii left in the wild, justifying its status as a critically endangered species. Of the 6 Aloidendron species, this is the most endangered of all. Here it is in cultivation again at the Carew Botanic Gardens, so less densely branched than dichotomum, longer, larger leaves. This is me at the Carew Botanic Gardens, with a backdrop of Aloidendron Perlanzii, taken by my friend Gideon Smith. Also here we are in cultivation in the UK. So we're now in Sussex. A lot of you will be familiar with Tony and Suzanne Nace and their huge collection of succulents at Anxty in East Sussex. They acquired a specimen of what was then Aloe Perlanzii in 1988. When they moved to Anxty in 1994, they bedded it out. They have a large open bed in the middle of their 50-foot greenhouse. So in 1994, they planted it out, and I visited them in 2015, and here it is with Tony on the white. So from 1994 to 2015, it had grown to about 3 meters tall. It wasn't quite touching the roof, but it was nearly so. In 2017, Tony and Suzanne decided to donate this plant to Kew. Now, this species is included in Appendix 1 of CITES, the Convention of Trade in Endangered Species. You shouldn't actually be commercially selling or dealing with this species. They couldn't technically donate this plant to Kew. So what happened was the Border Force team were on site. They confiscated this plant and immediately handed it over to Kew. That was the technical way they had to deal with this. So in 2017, the plant was about 4 meters tall. It went to Kew. It took 4 guys to move it out of this greenhouse and get it onto a truck. And it is now safely ensconced at Kew. Happy because it has more headroom. Switching to New Zealand, which is a wonderful country I visited twice. We're in the nursery of friend Martin Walker, no relation. Martin runs Coromandel cacti in Auckland. they had Aloidendron pilanziae bedded out. As you can see, they have 3 specimens. The lady there communing with the plants is Mirabelle Walker, Martin's wife, just there to show you the size of their specimens. There's a close-up of one of them. Notice here that this is quite an aged plant, so it has quite a fissured bark at the base. This plant had not divided. Neither had the maces, by the way. So at 4 meters tall, Tony and Suzanne Mace's plant had not branched either. A close-up of the leaf margins of Aloidendron pilanziae. And there's flowered. So Tony and Suzanne's plant had not flowered. Martin's plant had. So here is the inflorescence, the decumbent inflorescence of Aloidendron pilanziae. And this particular specimen, you can just see, is starting to branch dichotomously. So it was in flower. They had 1 plant in flower. You need 2 specimens to get seed. So what Martin and Mirabelle did was they took pollen from their 1 flowering specimen of Aloidendron pilanziae and pollinated another aloe halana, which is an Ethiopian endemic. They got seedlings. So this was a cross. This is technically an intergeneric cross. So this is Aloidendron pilanziae crossed with Aloe halana. Unfortunately, Martin didn't like the look of it and he ditched these plants, which was a shame, but there we go. And here is Eric's painting of Aloidendron pilanziae for the book. Notice the dichotomous branching. Just a sneak preview here. In the June issue of Cactus World, the Journal of British Cactus and Succulent Society, I have an 11-page article on Aloidendron pilanziae, and the image I'm showing you there is on the front cover. Watch this space, guys. That is published next month. And here is another image by Eric, also from the Tree Aloe book. Right. We've now switched to the eastern tree aloes, Aloidendron barbarae. It's got quite a wide distribution along the coast. For our paper in 2019, we did quite a lot of research on herbaceous specimens, and it turned out that records for Mozambique were not this species. They were its close relative, Aloidendron tongrense, which we'll come on to next. So we can say fairly certain at the moment that Aloidendron barbarae is restricted to South Africa and Eswatini, formerly Swaziland. Doesn't occur in Mozambique. Excuse me. Here it is in habitat. This is the biggest of the tree aloes. It grows up to 18 meters tall, which is nearly 60 feet. This is in central Cape Town. So I told you that the Dutch established a colony in the Cape Town. They had a garden in the center of Cape Town, which still exists there. And here is a specimen of Aloidendron barbarae in the company's garden. They've got several of them. This one is about 10, 12 meters tall, I suppose. That's me there for scale. This says that this tree aloe was planted about 100 years ago. So just zapping back, that tree aloe at about 12 meters tall has grown to that height in 100 years. We're at Kirstenbosch now, fabulous botanic garden in Cape Town. This is their biggest specimen of Aloidendron barbarae. We've got good records on this. This was also planted about 100 years ago. This specimen is around about 50 meters tall, and look how densely branched this is. This is Ernst van Jaarsveld at the foot of that tree, and on the right shows the architectural branching of this species. This is the base of that same specimen with the bottom half of Ernst. That tree aloe, that specimen of Aloedendron, 100 years old, is 3 meters in diameter at the base. This is not a plant for pot cultivation. You do need to have a climate where you can grow it out of doors. There's a young specimen at Kirstenbosch, one in cultivation in KwaZulu-Natal at Hayfields. This is quite a young tree. Another one, same locality. Right, back in New Zealand, I was an invited speaker at a convention in 2005, and we visited South Island, New Zealand. Here in Nelson, I was interviewed by a newspaper, and they wanted a photograph, so they took me up Church Hill, and here I am communing with Aloedendron barbari. Notice, ignore my mugshot. This specimen illustrates beautifully the V-shape formation of branching you get from dichotomous branching. And here is the front cover of the Nelson News. This is the first time ever I featured in a newspaper, and there we have it, aloe on the front cover. I'm not quite sure what the short and curly refers to. It certainly wasn't me. We also visited a heritage tree of what they called Alobanesiae. Again, you see the taxonomy is out of date. So we're close to Nelson. This tree was planted in circa 1954, and there's my wife, Marjorie, for scale of that tree, photographed in 2005. On the right here is the cover of Flowering Plants of Africa, you've seen already. And on the left, it's a photograph of the inflorescence, these rosy pink flowers, characteristic of Aloe barbari. Notice that the inflorescence on the right is also dichotomously branched. So these flowers are quite different to the eastern species. These are, as I say, rosy pink as opposed to the yellow ones. There's another picture of the flowers of this species. It can get infested with aloe cancer mites. Not a problem I have in this country, I have to say, but it can be a problem with plants growing out of doors, particularly in South Africa. I don't know whether this is a problem in America. And there is Eric's painting of Aloe barbari for the aloe tree aloe book. Right, Aloedendron tongense. This was described by Ernst as a new species in 2011, Aloe tongensis. It has quite a limited distribution, so it occurs in South Africa and southern Mozambique. It is very similar to Aloedendron barbari, and it has been confused. Herbarium specimens are quite often labeled as Aloedendron barbari or Alobanesiae or whatever, when they're actually this species. It's a much smaller growing tree aloe. It only grows up to about 8 meters tall. It is well branched like Aloedendron barbari, but the flower color is different. The flowers are actually quite significantly different. So this, unlike the rose pink flowers of Aloedendron barbari, Aloedendron tongense has sort of an orange color flower. And as I say, the trees themselves are much smaller. So barbari grows up to 18 meters. This grows no more than about 9 meters. And there's Eric's painting of Aloedendron tongense for the tree aloe book. And notice again, dichotomous branching of the inflorescence as well as the tree itself. The final species, I introduced this earlier. This was first described as Aloe eminens by Gilbert Rellens and Peter Bally in 1958, after they discovered it 4 years earlier in Somalia. It occurs in sheltered, well-wooded ravines north of Arigavo, It has a very limited distribution. Now, there's a huge disjunction in the distribution here. We are now about 2,500 miles northeast of the nearest locality in southern Mozambique of Aloidendron tongense. So there's a big gap in the distribution of these tree aloes. So we've got 5 in southern Africa, and then we've got this lonesome disjunct species in the north of Somalia. Peter Bruns has visited this locality only in September last year, and here is one of his photographs. To all intents and purposes, this looks very similar to Aloidendron barbarae, Aloidendron tongense, but here we are in Somalia. And Reynolds and Bally named this eminens because the Somali name was tall aloe, and eminens is the Latin version of that. So it is a very similar looking plant to the 2 southern African species. There it is in flower. So it's a reddish flower similar to barbarae and tongense. There is Eric's painting for the book. So it's quite a reddish flower, quite different to the yellow flower of Dichotoma, Ramosissima, and Palanzii. And finally, not a species, but a hybrid. I am embarrassed to say that I only discovered or heard about this in March this year. Apparently, this plant is very common in America, particularly in California. So hybridizers in California, followed by tissue culture, have made this quite a common plant, apparently. So this is an artificially produced hybrid, this Aloidendron barbarae, crossed with Aloidendron dichotomum, and a Brit called Darren Hobbs actually grows this in his garden in South Wales. And Darren published an article in March this year in an online journal called the Cactus and Succulent Review. So this was the first I heard of this hybrid. So this is Darren's plant in his garden in South Wales. On the left, it shows beautifully the dichotomous branching. Darren tells me this has never flowered, but it has branched. This plant has it hasn't doubled in size. Let me just check on this. So it was 1.3 meters in 2012, and by 2024, it was 12 feet or 3.6 meters tall. So it has grown rapidly in Darren's garden in South Wales. He does give it some winter protection from the frost. It can stand cold, but it can't stand cold and wet. So Darren keeps the rain off it. This shows characteristic features of a tree aloe. So fissured branching, fissured bark, dichotomous branching, and the general absence of the dead remains of leaves. So apparently this is quite a common plant in America where you can grow it out of doors. This would not survive out of doors here in Scotland, I can assure you. Right, final quick section then, tree aloes in art. So tree aloes have appeared in various art forms. Here we have a painting on the right and a stamp on the left. First, let's look at quickly a few paintings. Marion North was an intrepid Victorian lady. She travelled the world for 30 years painting. She paid for an art gallery to be built at Kew, the Marion North Gallery, which houses all her paintings. She's painted quite a few succulents, not many aloes, but she did visit what was then Zululand, and she painted what was for her Aloe Bainsii. And here is Marion's painting on the right. She painted in oils and mostly in habitat, so they tend to be landscape images rather than close-ups. Eric Judd, I've already introduced. So Eric started painting aloes back in the 1960s. And pardon me, in 1967, he published a little booklet called What Aloe Is That? And I've included in this slide the paintings he did of 4 tree aloes. Eminence hadn't been described at that point. Neither had Tungent. So we've got what he called Bainsii, Dichotomum, Palanzii, and Ramosissimum, the 4 southern African species known in 1967. Eric went on to produce more images of aloes, and tree aloes in particular. In 1976, he published for the Southern Electrical Company a calendar. This had 6 images of aloes. Unfortunately, they were printed back to back. I have a copy of this calendar, but I can only have 3 of them framed because the other 3 were hidden on the back. Anyway, very attractive images of aloes, and this is the only tree aloe amongst them. So that's Eric's painting for the 1976 calendar. I met Eric in 2007 because we were both attending a convention, the Aloes of the World in Pretoria. Kirstenbosch Botanic Gardens, I've already introduced. That's where Ernst used to work. They held biennial botanical art competitions, and in 2008, Jana Dickens submitted this image of Aloedendron dichotomum. This one is much more appealing to me. I actually own this print by Pam Quinlan, painted in 2014. I have cheated though. This is a very long, thin print. So the image on the right is actually the image on the left is actually the top part of the image on the right. And for this slide, I've cut it in half because otherwise I would have had a very long, thin image. But this hangs in our hallway. I'm delighted to have this in my art collection here. Metal artwork also features aloes. This is the Gilbert Reynolds Gate at the Pretoria Botanic Gardens. So this was opened in 1973, and they commissioned metalworker Hans Brugger to design and make 2 gates. This is the Aloe Gate, commemorating the aloe work of Gilbert Reynolds. The panel on the right is what we're focusing on, though. Here it is. This features 2 tree aloes. So the large tree in the center, Gideon Smith assures me is Aloedendron barbarae, whereas the 2 smaller images Gideon is taking to be Aloedendron palanzii. This is the only known metal artwork that I'm aware of that features tree aloes. Photographs now. Lots of published photographs of tree aloes, obviously. Here we are in 1986, the cover of the South African journal Aloe. Unfortunately, this is no longer in print. This is a Dave Hardy photograph of Aloedendron palanzii on the front cover. In 1971, Dave, along with Hans Bohrmann, published a book, The Aloes of the South African Veldt. This is the back dust jacket image, again featuring Aloedendron palanzii. This is one of my favorite all-time images of a tree aloe. In this country, we have a competition called the Wildlife Photographer of the Year. And in 2013, the Spaniard Miguel Fuertes Sanz submitted his photograph, The Magical Cockabooms. So this is not a painting, guys. This is a photograph. And this is a really stunning image. It's one of my favorite all-time images of any tree aloe or whatever. Ook was commended. He didn't actually win a prize, but he got a commendation for this photograph. Wildlife Photographer of the Year, by the way, includes lots of animal photos as well as plants. So quite often the animals tend to win out as opposed to the plants. But anyway, there we go. And finally, of course, aloes and tree aloes feature and stamps. I have to thank my friend and colleague who was in the audience, David Schultz. He sourced tree aloes on stamps for me. So here we have Aloidendron dichotomum in Namibian stamps. And finally, Aloidendron palanzii on the left is on a South African stamp, and on the right is on a Namibian stamp. So thank you, David, for finding those for me. David is well into stamps. I have to say this is not my specialist area, but I'm delighted to show the artwork of tree aloes on stamps. And that is the end, guys. So I thank David particularly for his help on stamps, but various other friends and colleagues have also given me permission to include their photos and paintings. So I'm happy to answer any questions, guys. Thank you.